All right, hi guys, welcome to day 3 of our digital learning. Today's lecture is going to be on lobbying, something that happens in Congress that we need to know in this unit we've been talking about with Congress and the House of Representatives and the Senate, and so we're just going to keep rolling with that today. Okay, so lobbying is pretty simple, pretty straightforward, pretty short subject that we're going to cover. Lobbying is the action of attempting to influence the legislative process in support of a special interest group. Okay, lobbyists, people who participate in lobbying in the House of Representatives or the Senate, have been hired by people who are not in government to represent their interest in government, to try to persuade members of the House of Reps or members of the Senate to pass laws related to what their special interest is. And so they're connected with these special interest groups, and that can be on anything. It can be on education, agriculture. The example I'll use in a minute has to do with the Second Amendment. But that's just kind of their job, is to try to get legislation passed in related to their special interest. And so lobbyists actually campaign to have policy approved that represents the special interest groups that they work for. They'll campaign to people who serve in the House of Representatives or serve in the Senate. Okay, so just an example of lobbying, the NRA, the National Rifle Association, employs lobbyists to persuade legislators, to persuade those members of the House and the members of the Senate to pass bills and enforce public policy that support their interest in gun control. Okay, they encourage and they campaign to these legislators to pass these bills to kind of continue to protect the Second Amendment. And the reason these special interest groups, these people outside of government, hire lobbyists is because it's the people who hire are the companies who manufacture guns and ammunition and related products. They obviously want laws to support that Second Amendment right, because if the Second Amendment were to go away or to be restricted, suddenly those companies are losing money. So that's why they hire lobbyists to continue to persuade legislators to pass bills that protect not only the Second Amendment, but to protect their businesses. And so that's what lobbying looks like. Okay, so there's some positive aspects of lobbying. It can do some good things. One thing is that lobbyist people who are hired to do this job are usually very knowledgeable on the issue that they represent. They spend a lot of time researching it and looking into it, and they can be very beneficial in educating members of the House and the Senate on issues at hand to better inform the legislators. People who work in the House and the Senate, they're more familiar with how the government works and the government process. They may not be as familiar with how their bills affect people working in the gun and ammunition industry and things like that. So they can serve as kind of a bridge to educating members of the House and the Senate when there's issues. So lobbyists also represent a wider group with similar interests, and they act as the spokesperson. In the House of Representatives, you have representatives that represent your district, but lobbyists they cross those lines. Lobbyists can represent a group in Georgia and also a group in Texas and a group in Alaska. They can represent these groups and pull them together to represent a wider group that has a similar interest, and they serve as this spokesperson. They're the person who speaks out about the issue and what the group wants, and they're the person that goes and talks to the legislators and tries to get those things passed. And lobbyists, they can even get really involved. If you get a legislator who really supports you and believes your idea and wants to help you get your legislation passed, they can call on lobbyists to actually assist in drafting legislation that'll include accurate, up-to-date information on issues of public policy. all that research that they've done can be used to help write the bill, which is better than a politician who maybe is not as familiar but has the power to get the bill passed. They may not know all the things that need to be in the bill to help the wider group with the interest. The last thing we need to note with lobbying, like I said, very short, very simple concept. There are some negative aspects of this part of our government. In the past, lobbying has had a reputation of bribery and the use of unethical practices. And what's that mean? What that means is that in the past, lobbyists would pay off politicians to get their things passed that they wanted, or they'll use methods such as blackmail on politicians, like, hey, I know this about you, I will reveal it to the public unless you help me pass this bill. So it's kind of got a negative connotation around our nation. People don't really have a lot of respect for this practice because there's been a huge reputation of bribery and unethical practices for surrounding it for a long time. So, but today things have kind of changed. Regulations have been put in place that remove those abuses that lobbyists used to use, like the bribery and unethical practices. But still today, one negative aspect of lobbying is that special interest groups with the most money are often the groups that get the most legislation drafted and passed in their favor. You got more money, you've got a bigger voice, and that's one of the downsides of lobbying, because you could be lobbying for something that's maybe doesn't help the majority of the American public. But if you've got more money to get your voice out there, to campaign harder, more important issues might get overlooked. And that's one big issue that people really have with lobbying today. It's because those important and valid issues that need to be addressed for public policy may go unnoticed at national and state levels because they don't have as much money. They don't have many people backing them. And that's like for the NRA, that's not really an issue of safety or health or anything like that, but they've got a lot of money and they've got a lot of backing. So maybe sometimes they can get legislation passed when we instead need something that's health related for the public, but it doesn't have as much money backing it. So that's just an example, but that's kind of shows you what lobbying is. I forgot to put a slide up here, but just so you know, for today, you need to watch this lecture, and then all you've got to do today is a discussion post. You're going to watch a video and answer a question for me, and then there's some extra resources if you need it. But that's it. So I hope you guys continue to have a great week and keep turning in things for me, and I'll talk to you guys soon.